Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kosietu. I'm your moderator for this particular workshop. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School. I think while we're waiting for 5 past, let me just go through introduction of this workshop. Earlier in the morning, we had a workshop under general guidelines and policies. So we have quite a number of workshops under the theme of a doctoral degree oral defense for this month. So if you joined earlier, I hope this workshop will be helpful for you to add up on what we have already learned earlier in the morning. So for this workshop, we're having student processes and tips. Our facilitator for this one is Dr. Tony Shabangu. Just to go through some housekeeping rule, please note that this workshop is recorded and all the resources, which include the presentation slides, as well as the recording, will be shared to your Moodle community. So if you do have any issues regarding accessing your resources, you are more than welcome to email the RCD team. The email is rcdinquiries. We will be able to assist you in accessing those past or workshops and recording. Colleagues, allow me to introduce our facilitator. Dr. Tony Shabangu is a philosophy lecturer at the University of Johannesburg, where his main areas of research specialization are African ethics, primarily Ubuntu. Prior to that, Dr. Shabangu was a coordinator at the postgraduate school at the Research Capacity Development Unit, where his role was to facilitate the postgraduate diploma, honors, and master's coursework student workshops, mini courses, short learning programs, events, and collaboration. Additionally, Dr. Tony has completed a postdoctoral research fellowship with the Center for Leadership Ethics-based fellow. As a student, Dr. Tony joined the University of Johannesburg in 2008 and recently received his PhD at the Department of Philosophy in 2002. Prior to graduation, 2022, Dr. Tony was on-site research writing consultant at University of Johannesburg Research Capacity Development Unit, located at the postgraduate school. Without Tony, we are good to start the session. But before that, I would like to notify everyone that we'll be sharing feedback evaluation. Please do feel that feedback, it only takes about less than 5 minutes. It helps us in organizing more workshops of this kind, as well as to report and give feedback to our facilitators for giving their time to facilitate workshops. As I've mentioned, the workshop is recorded. All resources will be shared via model communities. I will enable all your mics. Please do make sure that there is no obstruction from your side, background noise. If you do have a question, just raise your hand or just type in the chat box or use the Q&A. Myself and colleagues will notify Dr. Shabangu if there is any question. I don't know, Dr. Shabangu, if you will have a specific time for questions or just through the session, people are allowed to stop you whenever if they do have a question. I don't know how about that, Doctor.
I would prefer the latter, where people can stop me if there's an issue or if there's something you need me to explain. I'm more than happy to stop and go back, track back, explain anything. But also people are also more than welcome to wait till the end. I'm very open to both ways and modes.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much once again, colleagues, for taking your time. Please do register for other upcoming workshops which are on the same theme. Dr. Shabangu, I think you can proceed with this session. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Dooley. As introduced, I'm Dr. Tony Shabangu. I'm going to put my mic or not my mic, my camera on just for a few seconds. Sorry, my background is also making me look very dark, but I am human. Uh, this workshop, as mentioned, is focusing on VIVA processes, looking at the processes from the end of the student. I'm going to share my slides in a second, but you need to understand that this VIVA process involves a number of role players, one being the student, another being the not the supervisor, but the NAC, and then three being the assessors. So these people who all play a role see the process slightly different from their various perspectives. And what I'm here to share today is the perspective of the student, pretty much looking at what you can expect, and perhaps what kind of skills you need to develop when you know that a Viva is coming up. So I'm just going to ask if you can see the slideshow. It says sharing on my end. So yeah, there's the title of the slides.
Yes,
Um,
we can see your slides, Dr. Tony.
awesome. Perfect, perfect. Just to say some housekeeping rules with this, as mentioned, I'm really open to questions and comments throughout the workshop. So if there's something that you would like me to explain and stop and go back to, I'm more than happy to do that. But again, this is coming from my subjective experience, so not everything will make sense to you or will be applicable to you. But I want you to treat this workshop as if it was a walk through a supermarket, where in a supermarket, everything in the shop is pretty much useful at some point in some time, but you don't buy everything. You only take that which you need. So if you're out of a certain, you know, like, Handy Andy or something, you don't go buy everything. You go and buy Handy Andy. And I want you to treat this workshop like that, where you take the things that you feel are necessary for your development. If you feel like it does not speak to you or it's something outside of your field, then it's fine. It's something that you can leave. But I'm here to empower you and give you as many resources as possible when you go into this Viva process. Now, the Viva process is something quite new for a lot of us, specifically because in many universities, it wasn't something that was commonly used. And we've seen since about 2019, there's been a lot of more universities engaging in this type of assessment, primarily because there seems to be a discontinuity between what students write and when people speak to them or when they present at workshops, what they know seems to be very different. And this Viva process aims at bridging the gap between what we write and what we actually know and what we can say and present to other people. So for today's workshop, I simply have broken this down into 5 steps, which obviously seem very simple, but they are detailed. Firstly, we'll look at what a Viva is. I should have had a question mark there. We will be looking at what is being assessed when you're in a Viva, and then we'll look at the various proceedings, starting at the beginning, introducing yourself, all the way down to the reflection and outcomes at the very end. And then we will look at the various skills you should possess if you want to do absolutely great in a Viva. Again, as I said, not everything will work with everyone, but I do intend to empower you as much as possible. And then in the end, we'll talk about the outcome, because the outcome essentially tells you why you did this and how it affects you in the long run. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to just get right into it. My slides are frozen. Let me see. Okay, cool. So what is a Viva? A Viva, which comes from a word viva voce, oh, I'm not too sure if that's how you pronounce it, but is an oral examination commonly used in academic settings, and it's used to assess the depth of your understanding as an academic. It's used to assess how much of the dissertation you were actually doing. Yes, because some people get other people to contribute chapters and things like that. And so it's also to assess how much you that contributed into your own dissertation. It's to assess your depth, the depth of your knowledge, and also to see whether or not you are able to reflect on what has been done. A lot of people are able to relay what has been done, but not reflect on it, like take a critical stance on, I could have done this better, or this was a difficulty and I couldn't do any more than what I did. It's an opportunity for you to reflect also, and not simply just be a recipient of an assessment. It's an opportunity for you to also voice some of your opinions regarding the way your research was assessed. And this kind of assessment, as far as I know, is usually kept for the PhD student, but it seems that other universities also have it at the master's level.
Mm.
And perhaps maybe other departments also now are opening up to the idea of a VIVA at the master's level. So as I said, more and more departments, more and more universities are opening themselves up to this kind of assessment. So it won't be surprising to see in the near future where we have vivas in the entire university starting at the master's level. So now the actual word, the viva voce, means with the living voice. So being able to relay and disseminate this information using your own living voice, and it's oral rather than written. And as I mentioned, there are usually the same kind of role players in every Viva that you do. There will be your non-assessing chair, there will be you as the student who's being assessed, and then you will get your examiners in the room with you, um, uh, doing the Viva, because they are the people who've read your work and now they want to see how much you actually understand what you've produced. And in as far as I know, um, well, with my experience, I had an online Viva where it was set up between me and my examiners and my NAC and my examiners, some being overseas and all over the world. It just made sense to have the Viva online. But I can imagine in some other instances where a Viva can be a face-to-face kind of thing, especially when it's at a departmental level and you as a student are being inquired to sorry, there's some background noise there. I'm not too sure where it's coming from. Um uh, yeah, so the Viva generally happens online, as far as I know. But as I said, departments can take it upon themselves to bring the departmental members together and say, look, we want to assess our students, but not just the writing. We want them to come and present their work and explain what is going on, and take us through it. So the process itself does have a face-to-face element, even though at this point I know Vivas are generally conducted online just to kind of bridge the gap between people who are physically apart from each other and all of that. But also having it online means that identities can be kept secret. Your assessors can, remain anonymous if that's what they wish, through maybe a Teams or something like that, where they don't physically show themselves. They don't have any way in which you can get their email addresses or anything. And you only have that interaction based on the work that you were doing. So that's another reason why a lot of Vivas take place online. But again, as I said, as much as this is an assessment and you are being assessed, it is also an opportunity for you to then interrogate your assessors, ask questions around how they came to some of the, feedback they gave you, and how perhaps going forward you would amend, or going forward you would avoid these same errors and issues. Okay, so that's a Viva in terms of just the definition. But what does it do? It's meant to assess certain skills, and these skills, as we mentioned, lay beyond just writing. And this means that your ability to communicate clearly, not just in writing, but also verbally communicate ideas, summarizing and being able to have clear, succinct responses when asked questions, is one of the things that is assessed. And then secondly, your ability to think on your feet and think critically of your own work and where your own work is positioned when you look at other people's work in that discipline. So you need to be able to take a step back from your own work and look at it from the outside, um, and reflect on that work. It's very, very important to be able to take a step away from your work. I know the research we do is very personal and very close to us, and it's very meaningful for our maybe life goals. But we need to also understand that it's an academic enterprise, meaning that it will be evaluated, it will be assessed, there will be critical feedback, and you will be told that some things don't work, some things are wrong, some things are incorrect. So being able to take a step back from the work and remove yourself is actually quite crucial. And then another thing they assess is your depth of the knowledge. You need to be able to demonstrate the depth of your understanding on the research topic and its broader context. This means that you need to be well read. Your assessors will ask you the canon readings, and they will ask you any peripheral readings that you need to do, or you should have done. And it's up to you then to respond and say, no, I am familiar with that text, and this is why I chose to leave it out. Or, no, I'm actually reading up on that and it makes sense. I agree. You make a valid point. But if you are someone who says, I actually do not know what you're talking about, this would work against you because a lot of the points that are made in writing may be vague or ambiguous and may make it seem like you understand. And it's only when you speak about it and the level of clarity that you show that really shows that no, this person has a deep understanding of this research topic. There's this thing that people like saying that you truly know your research when you can explain a PhD project to a 4 or 5 year old. And that is a very difficult task because you need to have a deep understanding to simplify the language in a way that someone with zero academic background can grasp the knowledge too. And this is what they want to see. Are you able to take huge technical concepts and break them down in simple language that even someone who is a non-informed kind of assessor can understand what you're saying? And then finally, you are being assessed for your ability to handle problems. And this is both handling the research problems that you have set out or the research questions which you intend to answer, but also when you are presented with new scenarios in the Viva, when they say, let us take your theory and apply it to a new scenario, you need to be able to apply yourself and handle a variety of situations. This is not to say that it always happens this way, but it does happen that in the questions, you are asked to apply the theory in a relatively new space, or you are asked to take what you've learned and bring in a new example that has not been utilized before, meaning that you need to be able to not only understand the research topic, but also solve the various problems that come out of that research. Do we have any questions? Okay, I'll take that as no questions so far. I can't see anything because I'm on my full screen, but just please, yeah,
Dr. Tony,
like,
there are no questions at the moment in the chat box, and
perfect.
no one has risen a hand yet.
Awesome. Okay. So moving on now from what is being assessed to the process, because I explained what it is and then what is being assessed. Now, when you approach a Viva, when you get your dates set, they send you the dates of the 15th of October for your Viva. You need to start then planning your presentation, however much time you're given. If it's 15 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, you need to plan it around a structure that looks somewhat like this, where you have an introduction and a way of presenting what your findings are, presenting the research, and presenting the main arguments, the main theories, the main concepts, the main uh, experiments that were conducted. This is your opportunity in the beginning. You introduce yourself. I am this person. I'm working on this said topic, and these are the various questions I was looking at, and these are my approaches to this question, and these are my results, or this is my thesis statement, or this is my argument, or this is what my findings are. You then, after you've presented and you've introduced yourself, are given an opportunity to answer questions. So the assessors will then ask you questions. And at this level, it may be structural questions. It may be questions which then are also not just structural, but looking at the conceptual development of your paper. It may be your arguments or your approaches, your methodology. It may be even something technical like your referencing style. They are welcome to ask you anything regarding that research. So you can't just prepare responses that are perhaps around the arguments only, because you may find that they end up focusing on the structure of the paper. Why did you start with this issue instead of that? How do you tend to connect these 2 points? So it's not an easy thing to simply just say, as long as I've covered the basis of my conceptual analysis, or as long as I've covered the literature review in its depth. It's actually a very dynamic space, which you need to just prepare in a way that you are comfortable with your research. And by comfortable, I don't mean you are disillusioned by saying it's very good, it's awesome, and you can't break it, but you're comfortable with the fact that you know the flaws and you know the good parts of it too. You need to have a good understanding and kind of very reflective look at your research before going into a Viva. Why? Because then the questions are then developed into you having to defend your research now. Ask you very, very difficult questions. Why did you choose this methodology over, let's say, what is relatively closer to your research? Why did you make this study a qualitative study when you're working with statistical values, numbers, and all of that? Why is it not hybrid if you're trying to look at both? This is then the defense of your research that comes in. Then they ask you issues around original contribution of knowledge, the implications of your work and what comes out of it in the future. They ask you for clarification questions, and then finally there are closing questions and reflections. This is just the procedure. I will break it down individually what each of these topics mean, but if you at least have in the back of your mind that you will tick all of these boxes, I will produce an introduction and present my research. I must be ready for questioning. And after that, I will then reaffirm what I'm doing by defending the research. I will also reaffirm my original contribution, talk about the implications and future work, speak about what the parameters and limitations around the work are, and then respond to questions. So the introduction, as it says, straightforward. The candidate may start with a brief presentation summarizing their research or project, including its aims, methodology, key findings, and conclusions. And then you also need to provide an overview. And that means you may be asked to give an overview or background of the dissertation to set the stage. Sometimes it's nice to have a hook, something very interesting to start the research, to start the Viva with. So let's say my research question is around justice, and maybe justice for animals, maybe looking at animal rights. And then I just start the Viva by saying, presented with a burger made out of 100% beef. What is your favorite meal, perhaps? You don't want to ask a question because these are your assessors, but you ask the question to yourself and you say, McDonald's, Steers, these are all places which we enjoy very much. But when we have to discuss the issues of animal rights, people tend to forget what's in front of their plate and only think about the implications on the environment. That is a very interesting way to bring them into the research and also almost ask a question that is in the research. You don't have to do it like that. But this is what confidence does for you. When you are confident, you are able to ask questions like that and lay the presentation out in such a smart way, a very enticing way that really invites people into what you have to say. Then you need to be ready for questions, but not only ready for questions, it's important that you also have questions for yourself. General questions, these are often aimed at the broader context of the research. Examiners may ask questions to assess the candidate's general understanding of the field, its current state, and the relevance of their work within that context. You must remember, your assessors are experts in the field. So they will have both a focused understanding of what you're doing, but also a general overview of what's happening in the world around that certain discipline. Is there a question? I heard a voice. No?
Yes, Dr.
Yes.
Tony, in the chat box, a question from Kumbulani saying some universities have a process where you defend the proposal and the final thesis. At UCL, what is the procedure?
Well, the VIVA is the defense of, well, not the proposal. That usually happens at a faculty level where your faculty will determine whether there needs to be a proposal defense, or at a DHDC, your Departmental Higher Degrees Committee. They will also say if there needs to be proposal defenses. And I think right now, the decision of whether or not the proposal needs to be defended lays on the DHDC. So if your department hasn't mentioned anything about defending a proposal at this stage, I don't think it would be happening because this is the time of the year where the defenses would generally be happening. And if you've gone through 6, 7 months, 8 months of the year without even knowing of this, then it's unlikely. But this is something you should inquire with your department. They would have a straightforward answer whether or not the proposal needs to be defended before the DHCC.
Thank you, Dr. Tony, for that. Another question from Spiwa. How often is this exam held? After how long is it held after the thesis submission?
So that's actually something which I'm not too sure about, but the general understanding is that um, within the first 6 months of your proposal, not your proposal, of your submission. So if you submit in October, then by February the following year latest, you would have a response from the examiners. And then I think they give them 3 months after that to to do corrections, and then there's a VIVA process that takes place. I'm not 100% sure if it's still like that because I did my VIVA during COVID, and my VIVA process was really all over the place because of the disruption of COVID. So I submitted my thesis in October. I got feedback in about June the following year, and then I did my VIVA in around September. So you can see how that process was a little stretched out. I imagine that it's not so stretched out, that it's actually much tighter. So maybe 8 months after submission. I will double check and ensure the right details for that. I don't want to give you an incorrect date right now. But yeah, you should at least give 8 months, I'd say, before you do the VIVA after submission. Okay. Um, so going back to the
Sorry,
question,
Dr.
yes.
Tony. Just interrupting because in the earlier session, which also another student has pointed out in the chat, it's usually 2 weeks after the examiner's report.
Okay.
So, like you said, maybe the examiner takes 3 months, and then the VIVA happens 2 weeks after that.
Okay, that makes much more sense. Um, but there's also it's such a tight window if it's 2 weeks because you also have corrections at that time. And to do your corrections and prepare for the Viva at the same time is quite difficult because you want to address the things that they said are wrong. And at the same time, you want to be prepared for the Viva. So have that in mind. Have that in mind, that once you get the feedback from the examiners, then it's a process of 2 weeks after that. Yeah, okay. So moving on with the questions, examiners delve into specific details of the research, including methodology, data, and findings. They might question the validity of certain approaches, data interpretation, and conclusions drawn. There's also a critical evaluation where candidates are expected to demonstrate critical thinking and defend their choices. As I said, you need to give a rationale for a lot of what happens in your research. As I mentioned, why you use a certain methodology, why this theoretical framework works with your research and not another one, why you have chosen certain participants, why you've chosen this kind of study over a different one. They may be asked to explain why they chose certain approaches over others, which is essentially the critical evaluation. And again, with the critical evaluation, it must be both inward looking and outward looking. So you must be able to look at yourself and say, does this make sense? Yes, I want to defend it and say, yes, this is why I chose it. But looking at the greater scheme of things, does it make sense for me to fight tooth and nail for it? Or can I submit and say, there could have been a better approach, but this was the safest one for me? Think about those kinds of responses. And must remember that these people who are your assessors are also human beings, and they understand the dynamic elements that are involved when we do research. Research is not something concrete that does not change over the years. We tend to change the way we do it and approach it quite regularly. So as long as you're able to explain your choices and decisions, you will be able to do pretty well in the VIVA. Doesn't mean that just because you're explaining it, you're going to pass. It still depends on the actual research that you produce. But the VIVA process just looks at your thinking processes, how you got to that conclusion. Can you explain to someone who doesn't know how you chose that sort of approach? Can you explain, and can you make it make sense in a different example? And then the defense of the research, which comes after the questioning. The candidate should be able to justify their research design, data collection techniques, analysis methods, and any limitations. Examiners may challenge the findings and ask for alternative interpretations, as mentioned, or explanations. The candidate must be able to defend their conclusions or acknowledge potential weakness. This is why it's absolutely important to be able to look inwards. When you're unable to fight and defend, you must concede. And you must think about it wisely. Don't start a fight that you know you will have to concede. If you know you'll have to concede, just be upfront and rather plan for a proper concession where you will have some sort of retort. Look, I failed to see this blind spot, but in my failure, I actually managed to identify some new areas which were, taken for granted. Be smart, have a very good understanding of your flaws and your strengths. You need to also know your own original contribution. This is something which, from the point of the proposal, you are asked about. And I know a lot of us struggle with this. A lot of us still want to have a world-changing original contribution when we do our research. And it's not to say that, or it's not to discourage you and say your original contribution can't be that authentic and world-changing. But you need to consider it within the backdrop of the academic community. It needs to fit within what has been done or what people are currently doing. So examiners will evaluate the originality of the research and ask about its contribution to the field. They may ask questions to probe the novelty being how new, how original, how authentic is this thing? And how advances existing knowledge. So just a tip about this. Again, you don't have to come up with a brand new theory or make up a brand new concept that didn't exist, or be a person who is named after something like Ohms or Newton, who's you don't have to go that big. In academia, original contribution can be a matter of perspective. saying that I'm just looking at this from a point in which it hasn't been looked at previously. It can be a matter of establishing a relationship or connection where there was none. So I want to look at the connection between this and that, that can be an original contribution. So you need to just think about this carefully, where the originality of your research comes in, whether it comes from a perspective element or whether it comes from an ability to create necessary connections between things, or perhaps it just comes out of you altering something that has been done previously and bringing in new variables to it. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to, as I said, doesn't have to be enormously original. It has to just show something new that if I were to read 1,000 proposals, maybe I won't find more than 5 papers that speak about a similar way of doing that thing. Okay. Any questions? Right.
And nothing so far from the
Awesome.
chat.
Okay. So another thing that is asked is, what implications does this research have? What kind of applicability in the future would this have? What does it change in the status quo? And this is then a matter of impact and a matter of future direction. The candidate may be asked to explain the broader implications of their findings and how they contribute to the field and society at large. The candidate should also be prepared to discuss possible future work that could arise from the research, addressing any gaps or areas for further investigation. A lot of disciplines at UJ now have the requirement of, when you submit your doctoral thesis, that you need to have publishable papers, at least 2 of them, if not already published papers, excuse me. And so what this means is that your research needs to show an ability to have impact, number one, but also that it can inspire new research. And this is the kind of questions they ask. What kind of developments can come from this project if we were to look 5 years from now? Or perhaps, what are the broader implications when we look beyond your research that we can find around this kind of topic? More so, you should be able to say, I aim at publishing in this space if you haven't already. I aim at extending this research to, perhaps if we're moving from animal ethics to AI ethics, because the implications are very closely linked. Whatever it is, you need to have an understanding of the kind of potential of your research. You need to understand how far the research can reach beyond your topic, whether it's just the methodology, whether it's your conclusions, or whether it's the perspective you've decided to take. Maybe it'll influence new people to look at the same topic differently. Just checking how we're doing for time. Okay, we're good. Then examiners might refer to specific sections of the thesis. This usually happens once you've explained yourself and you've tried to defend. Then generally at this point, they start to pick apart your research. It's then this time where they say, oh, that section is underdeveloped, or, your references say nothing about this thing which you discussed for 3 pages. So examiners might refer to specific sections of the thesis or dissertation for clarification, asking for explanation of certain passages, equations, or results. This helps them assess whether the candidate's mastery of the content is good enough or not, and whether or not they pay attention to detail. If you're someone with very sloppy writing, they will mention it, not only in the feedback they give you, but they will tell you that I couldn't understand a certain section because your writing was all over the place. What did you mean? And then you'd have to explain that passage, section, or results. And then there's a section in which they ask for closing remarks or questions. The examiners may ask the candidate about their personal journey in the research process, what they found challenging, or how their thinking has evolved. More so, some Vivas end with a general question about the candidate's future plans, such as how they might apply their research in future studies. Now, this is where you need to be honest. You need to be truly honest here, because you can lose an opportunity if you are not honest. The opportunity being to improve. If you say, I really struggled with a certain methodology, and you're speaking to experts in the field, they will likely have ways to overcome that. They will give you some advice. Say, look, this worked, but in essence, we wouldn't do it this way. They will also tell you about their own personal journeys, which may be helpful for you. I know someone who told me during my Viva that they had not really experienced prisons as much as they would have liked, but at the very same time, they have this fear. And that spoke to me because I wrote my thesis on prisons. I didn't want to go in and out of prisons all the time. I had that little bit of fear. But that also reassured me because I barely did any field work. Fortunately, in my field, we aren't required. So I was just doing it for my own interest. Um, but it kind of speaks to you sometimes when you hear your assessor's own kind of personal reflection. Because when you are very honest in your personal reflection, they too will give you the same kind of response. So be honest here. Talk about your difficulties as much as you will talk about your successes. But I think it's a good place to now place your worries or things that concern you, especially if these things that concern you affected how you did your research. Okay, I'm going to now veer off from the procedure and just now talk about what skills one should possess if you wish to do well in a Viva. And this is, you're going to say pretty much you knew this already. As much as the presentation here has been new, I know some of the points seem very straightforward. Like, you will have to explain your research. You will have to defend from questions and all of that. And you know that you'll have to present. So presentation means you'll have to communicate in a certain way. You'll have to have certain confidence. So these may be things that you feel like you already know, but it's good to re-emphasize them for you, just so everyone's on board and we're on the same page. The very first thing you need to develop is your in-depth subject knowledge. Be familiar with the broader context of your research area and how your work fits within it. It's nothing worse than you get to a Viva and the assessors can tell all you read was that which you wrote. There's nothing outside of that you engaged with. They can tell. They can essentially tell because they'll ask you something very closely related, or they'll ask you about the various debates in the literature. And the moment you show that you do not know those debates, it tells them a lot about how much research you didn't do. So have as much in-depth knowledge of the field and be familiar with things like common debates or even the development of a concept. My thing is, what I tell my students is, if you want to talk about a theory, like let's say Ubuntu, you need to be able to tell me where it originates from. It doesn't mean to say you need to say now it started in someone's backyard, but you need to say they were traditional African societies, which maybe didn't write about it, but lived and experienced Ubuntu every day. And then it was developed by sages who were the wise people in the village, who then came up with phrases and principles and things like that. And then the scholars took it on. Show me that kind of development, or tell me that within Ubuntu, there's a debate about what a person is. There's disagreement about what the word Ubuntu means. All of those things tell your assessors that you've done in-depth reading and you are familiar with the broader context. You need to have mastery of your own research also. You need to know your dissertation inside out, including the various sections. I would say take your proposal and use it as a checklist. Ensure that you can introduce your research in a way that makes sense. Ensure that you know the literature that your research is framed around. Ensure that your methodology is something you have at hand. Ensure that you know the limitations of your research. So I would suggest that once you've submitted and now you're waiting for the assessors to plan your VIVA, just revisit your proposal and ensure that you know those parts of the proposal. Even the outline of the study, you know the outline of the study very well. You know your original contribution. It's all already in the proposal template. So if you go and study that proposal template that you submitted to the faculty and was approved, it should be very helpful in planning the in-depth aspect of your knowledge. Then you need to be able to think on your feet and be critical in your analysis of what is being asked of you. You need to be able to evaluate your own work, assess your strengths and weaknesses in the research, recognize the limitations and discuss the challenges faced. And you need to be able to anticipate certain critical points when it comes to your research. Now, to plan for this, one good way is look at the examiner report. The examiner report will give you everything that you will need to know about how your assessors think. It will give you comments on what is very important that was done wrong, what is less important that was done wrong, and you can ensure that you've covered the very important aspects before you get to the VIVA. Be able to think flexibly also, because as I said, sometimes examiners will provide an example that was nowhere near your research, and you need to be able to adapt your research to answer the question that they ask. You need to also have defensive skills, meaning that you need to be prepared to defend your research choices, methodology, theoretical framework, data, and interpretation. What this also means is that you need to be able to take critical feedback. If you are unable to take critical feedback, you will not take an intellectual defensive stance. Instead, you'll take an emotional defensive stance. And you don't want to be emotional in a space like a VIVA. You have very limited time, and you need to get straight to the point in terms of what must be said. You need to be accurate and not emotional. When you're emotional, you're going to want to defend your person, whereas your person is not what's in question here. Your research is what's in question. They don't care about who you are personally. They care about the research. So you need to be able to step back, say, I know my name is Tony, but Tony's not the one being attacked here. It's Tony's work. So if I make it very personal and I make Tony respond instead of the academic that wrote that, then I'm losing points in this VIVA. You need to respond confidently to examiners' critiques and questions that challenge your conclusion. And when it comes to communicating, it's important that you're clear, that you're able to explain complex ideas clearly and concisely, avoiding jargon and technical terms. Like I said, when you can explain something like a PhD to someone who's in primary school, you're doing an excellent job. Use that opportunity. If there are children in your life, ask them to, please give you 5-10 minutes of their time and just go off and ask them if they understand anything. If they understand zilch, then you need to simplify it even further. You need to be more clear and more concise in what you say. Also, you need to show enthusiasm when you're discussing the research, which is why I spoke about things like a hook, an interesting way to bring the assessor into what you're talking about. By showing your own interest, by being invested in it, not emotionally, but intellectually. That's how you keep examiners interested. When you can provide examples that light up their minds like, wow, I never thought of that. This guy is actually passionate about this. This is a matter of effective communication. Any questions?
Yes, Dr. Shabangu, there is a question from Kumbulani. Is it acceptable to have new contribution to be at practice level? For example, having your contribution as to improve the enactment or of a certain policy or to implementation of a policy. I don't know if you get that question, Dr. Tony.
Oh, I think I get it. I think I understand where he's going in terms of you have a certain policy and the way in which you apply it, almost that would be original. The way in which you take certain principles and apply them differently, that would be original. Or to show that these principles, in fact, are not as sound as we think they are, that would be original. So in terms of that question, when you investigate something, your investigation of it can be original too. Your assessment of a certain thing can be original, especially if it's something that has not been done. When we look at the Constitution of South Africa, Constitution of South Africa has been evaluated countless times and has been applied in various instances. So you need to be very knowledgeable in order to find a unique contribution in that space. But when we're looking at something like, for instance, with me and the prison space, there's something that was introduced called the Mandela Rules for Prisoner Treatment, which are pretty much new. And so I can assess those and say, look, this is not Mandela. Mandela would not say this. Or this is not something which would work in South Africa, even though it was made under the guise of a South African leader. You know, you're allowed to do that, and that counts as some sort of original contribution. Okay, so you need to have good presentation skills too. You need to be able to organize your answers logically, begin with the main point, and then elaborate with supporting details. If there are any slides that you can use, then it's important that you have clear slides that are not full of writing. You don't just take chunks from the dissertation, you take points and you speak to the points of the slides. You ensure that your slides are clear, that the writing and the font is clear, that you have visual aids if you need be. So if you need graphs, illustrations, pictograms, anything, this needs to be in your slides. As long as it enhances your argument, it enhances the core of what you wish to say. And then time management. You are given a set amount of time with the VIVA, and this time includes questions. So be mindful. Don't try speak the whole time in an effort to avoid questions because you will be cut short. You will not be able to use the entire time for yourself. You must be able to focus on answering what is being asked. Do not waffle. If you are unsure, be honest and say, can I please take some time to think about that? I will get back to you. Or is it fine if I respond to other questions for now and then come back to this? There's nothing wrong with that. The point is, you don't want to waste time trying to find the answer while talking about things that have nothing to do with the answer. And pacing. You don't want to speak too fast. You don't want to speak too slow. You want to be able to give yourself space to explain and illustrate. So when you prepare, don't prepare to the minute. Give yourself enough room to take breaths. If you need to drink water, keep water next to you so that you can take a break and have a sip of water. Actually, the water is absolutely useful when you find that you're losing your rhythm. Just take a 2 second break to drink some water. It does something to you psychologically. I don't know how. And then you start again, and you'll find that you'll get your rhythm back if you find that you're speaking too fast or too slow. And then you have to be able to solve problems. You have to respond to unexpected questions. Examiners may ask you questions that you didn't expect. As I said, you need to just stay calm and think critically. Your confidence is what will carry you through in these cases, but more than your confidence, your in-depth understanding of the topic, theme, and research is really going to be what helps you. You need to keep that in your back pocket, and you need to be adaptable. If your answer is challenged or proven weak, it's fine to say, okay, I I concede. This may not be the best way to approach this issue. Nothing wrong with that. But if you try defend, and fight and become defensive, and you are defending against people who are much more experienced in this very field, you may come out short in the end. And you may actually give yourself a bad reputation as someone who's non-agreeable, who cannot take feedback. You need to have confidence and composure, stay calm under pressure, and your body language, especially because the VIVA process, you need to put your camera on and they see you. So if you're very fidgety, they can pick that up. If your eyes are all over the place except the screen, or you're reading, they can pick that up. So try, be confident, and have key cards. Don't have the entire dissertation in front of you. Just have key cards. And you can even categorize your key cards. Have one that is going to be the introduction. Have one that's going to be the, the methodology and stuff. So you can just flip through those key cards and have the most important information in each key card. And then there's an aspect of self-reflection. You need to be able to self-reflect. Examiners respect candidates who can acknowledge limitations or areas of improvement in their own work. And be ready to talk about how your research could be expanded, improved, or applied in future studies. By honing these skills, candidates can enter a VIVA confidently, ready to demonstrate both their knowledge and ability to engage with constructive criticism. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is my final slide. The outcome, after the questioning, the examiners then discuss the candidate's performance privately. So they'll chuck you out the room and they'll sit down with your NAC and they'll discuss what you did well, what you didn't do so well, and they will have to give an outcome in the form of this: either pass, minor revision, major revision, or in very, very bad cases, a full out fail. Then this information is relayed to you via the NAC, the non-assessing chair. This is someone who is generally not an expert in the certain field that you're working in. It's not a specialist, but they belong to your department. They are a departmental member, and they are able to then speak to assessors on your behalf, because you must remember, you never have access to the assessors ever, except at the VIVA. That's the only contact you will have with your assessors. Other than that, it's your NAC who will then disclose whether you've passed or you failed. And should you have any issue with the VIVA environment, or perhaps the issues discussed, you raise it with your NAC, who then relays it back to the assessors. Do we have any questions, ladies and gentlemen? I had planned to speak for an hour, and I think I've managed my time quite well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shabangu. To colleagues, if you do have a question, this is now the platform. Just raise your hand. I will notify Dr. Shabangu, and you can enable your mic and just ask a question. If not, just use the chat box and just type a question there, and then we will go through it. For now, there is a question from Mapena. And how long do the examiners take to give the final report?
This is the final report after the VIVA or before the VIVA?
I think after
After the VIVA, it's actually
after the VIVA.
It's actually relatively quick. I got my feedback that same day. They just sit and they have a chat once you're off screen, and then you get an email within that same day. So it's not something that takes long, because they usually already have a decision made, and the VIVA just convinces them one way or the other.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Shawang, for that. Eva, you may unmute yourself and ask your question.
All right, thank you. So I'm using a friend's account, and that is why you see Eva. But my question is, I was at a VIVA. You spoke about the fact that you don't have to be overly defensive when the people there are very experienced and all of that, right? So I was at a VIVA, and then there was a panel member who was telling the student that you cannot use focus group discussion as a data collection technique within ethnography, and that for ethnography, it is strictly participant observation, and you cannot, the examiner was the panel member was very emphatic that you cannot use focus group discussion in an ethnographic setting. It turned out not to be true after all. I mean, supported by a lot of literature, Criswell and Criswell 2018, and a host of other studies you find around proves otherwise. So in that case, what does the student do? Do you have to just keep quiet and make it look like what the panel member is saying is true? Or what exactly can you do in that situation?
That's a good comment. I think the only thing you can do, right? Because these people who are your assessors have been paid by the university, and by the point of the VIVA, they've pretty much given reports and everything. At that point, what I would suggest is that you acknowledge their point and then you write to the NAC. That's the only way, because you can't fight and correct them when they are marking you. Whereas you can raise it with the NAC, who then has the backing of the faculty to query those things. You yourself may not have the weight to query it in the VIVA, and if you go back and forth, it may just eat your time. So you concede, and you may make a remark and say, I would like to, present studies that show otherwise. Nonetheless, I concede to your point, and would be happy to move on. I don't think it's worthwhile trying to take assessors on in a VIVA. It's not a good venture, because even the other assessors who are in the room get a certain perspective about you, and that may influence your mark in the end. Whereas if you concede and say, that is, it's a valid point. However, I would, it would be interesting to, provide some evidence to show. That kind of leaves it in it's fine, we can move on situation. You don't want to waste your time. That's the point I'm trying to make, trying to convince them otherwise. When, as I say, they are experts. They are coming from a point of expertise. It's just best to have that discussion with your NAC, either after, or you can email them while you are in the VIVA. Just to answer another question, your supervisor won't necessarily, well, your supervisor will be in the VIVA, actually. I remember my supervisor was in the VIVA, but they won't say much. They won't say anything. They're not allowed to engage on your behalf. They're mostly as observers, and they won't defend you either. So in a case where you have like assessors fighting for like to make a point, like the comment made just now, your supervisor will likely also not fight that and just concede, and then tell you later that that guy did not know what he's talking about. That's as much as they can do. But that tells you something. If the supervisor won't say anything, it doesn't matter if you fight and scream and shout. It's rather just concede and keep it moving. Yes. The question. Sorry.
I don't know if that was a question from Lukman. Okay. Okay, we have another question from Tankiso. Let me just go through. In case where examiner gets difficult, the approach to asking questions is unfriendly, with less of intellectual humility and hit your nerve. What a way to cool down. Drink water.
Yes, drink some water and maybe ask questions to your NAC. Direct some questions to your NAC. Don't redirect questions back to the assessor. So you could, let's say the assessor is saying, no, your methodology does not work with this kind of study. It just absolutely cannot work. And I don't understand why you put it here. For me, it's just nonsense. Let's say the assessor says that. Then I would turn to my non-assessing chair and say, is it fine for this kind of language to be used? You direct questions to your NAC if you feel undone. But again, you can use a chat function on the side if you don't want it to be awkward, because you'll generally be in a Teams like this, or you can send them an email. But you have to really remove yourself from this process. Yes, some assessors take this as an opportunity to take their stress out on students and, lash out. But have a stress ball. Squeeze that stress ball when that person is going off on you. Have one of those things you spin. I forgot what they call those fidget spinners. Just spin a fidget spinner while he's talking and let him go off and focus on the content. Why? These Vivas are recorded. So if the NAC feels like you were undone, they can always forward it to the faculty. Then the faculty will address the assessors because the assessors are paid by the faculty. And you are always in a position of advantage when that happens. Rather than if you try lash back and try, get your piece out of it. It's better to just leave it to the faculty. I'm seeing more questions. I just went through my Viva 2 weeks back, and it was an informative session and calm environment. Supervisor was not allowed to say anything, but was happy with the responses after the session. You see, again, the supervisor cannot say a word. They are just an observer there. They may as well not be there, but you get to debrief with them afterwards. So if there is anything that you feel like was unfair, it's nice then to go and have a chat with your supervisor and say, look, how did you feel about these questions? Do you think they were justified? And, debrief, but they can't say anything. And generally these sessions are kept at a level where it shouldn't get out of hand. The non-assessing chair is there for that very reason, to ensure that it's a humane and charitable interaction. It's supposed to be charitable in a way that it's supposed to give you points to improve. It's supposed to give you a little more confidence after that. It's supposed to give you a little more insight into what more can be done. So thank you for that feedback, Makumbe. But again, it's not always the case that your supervisor may be there. Your NAC has to be there. I know in some cases where the student is alone or is with a co-supervisor who may know very little about their research. So it's really a plus to have your supervisor there, but it's only a psychological plus. It's not anything that you could use to kind of help you explain your way out of anything. And then your supervisor will also be knowledgeable about these people that have been chosen to assess. So they can tell you that, yeah, this person's expertise are mostly in, literary studies. So they won't really understand what you're trying to say here. They'll give you context as to why some of these comments were asked, but they can't answer anything for you. Any other good experiences with the Viva? Any bad experiences? Anything that you feel is a warning to others? Because I think we all just feel this heaviness when we have to do a Viva. But I think you have a better chance to do well if you are confident, if you are in a position where you know what you're doing, and the session is flowing, where your responses are clear and accurate and you're not waffling about nonsense. Generally those sessions go well, and generally, like I say, your NAC will ensure everything is at a level. Okay, any other comments, questions? My Viva was absolutely amazing. I enjoyed it primarily because my written feedback was all over the show. I got people with varying expertise assessing my research, but sitting them in one room, I think consolidated a lot of the points that they were making into one. It kind of made it make sense. So I did appreciate that, and it made also the whole experience much more worthwhile, because now I can explain the research to people in a way that I'm confident. After explaining to assessors, I've never really struggled to present my research anywhere, because that is the heaviest situation, to explain what you're doing. Outside of the assessment, people can say this and that. You don't have to change anything. It's your research. But yeah, confidence, guys. Have confidence. Prepare. have conversations with people about your research. Those are all ways in which you can prepare yourself for the impending day. Okay. Any other final comments, questions? I won't keep you guys much longer than I have to if you have no questions. I do have an email address which I can pop in the chat box if you have any further questions. I am found on campus at UJ, but at this point, I think you guys should be good to go. It should be that time of the year where we are all good to go. Attendance register. I have no idea about that. I know there's supposed to be a form that you all have to fill.
Yes, Dr. Tony, there is an attendance or evaluation form which I've just shared to the participants. Please do fill that form. This will help you. This will help you in getting a certificate, attendance certificate. We now provide an attendance certificate to
Wow.
all the participants that join our workshop to prove to your supervisors that indeed you have attended a certain workshop, and it also help us to give feedback to our facilitators, the feedback as well as for us to report and organizing workshop of this kind. So we do have other upcoming workshops such as supervisor processes and tips. Another one it's assessing chair and non-assessing chair. So be in a lookout for that and do register for those upcoming workshops so that you can have a full background and full knowledge of this whole VIVA thing processes. Please just attend those workshops. They are very helpful to you. Thank you so much. I don't know if we do have a question. Participants, the presentation as well as the recording of this workshop will be shared to your model communities. So if you do have a problem, as I've mentioned earlier, you are more than welcome to email our city team. We will help you in assessing those workshop recordings as well as presentations. So please do fill in the feedback evaluation. We thank you for taking your time. So anyone who have a question before we can close the session?
Happy to take any comments, questions, anything I should improve. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad that it's been helpful. Sorry for the background noise. I do hope I hear great news from all of you that you've passed your VIVA and we've got new doctors and all of those wonderful things. Thank you so much for attending and wishing you all the very best in this time of the year, submission period, applications, all of that. Please do be sure to keep ahead of the deadlines and beat the deadlines. Thank you so much for your attendance. It's been a wonderful session for me. Yeah, thank you to the RCD team also for putting it together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shabangu, for taking your time and facilitating this workshop. Indeed, it was a very informative workshop. We thank you for your time, and we're looking forward into working with you in more upcoming events or workshop. To all our participants, colleagues, thank you so much for taking your time. We hope these kinds of workshops are really, really meaningful and have an impact in your research journey. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.